This past Saturday, St. John's battled Michigan in their final preseason exhibition game before they start counting next week, November the 3rd, against Quinnipiac. We'll talk about a game that had that March feel to it in this episode of the Johnny's Report. Again, it was just November. Again, it was just a preseason exhibition basketball game, but St. John's and Michigan battled it out at Madison Square Garden like it was a March Madness game or a game in the preseason invitational tournaments. But it had all the kind of big March implications that you wouldn't typically find or you wouldn't think you'd find in an exhibition game. A 96-94 overtime thriller at Madison Square Garden, a game that St. John's would later say, players and head coach Rick Pitino, you'll hear in a moment, they all said that, hey, we found a lot about ourselves in this game against Michigan. It was something that obviously I think was much needed for St. John's. I think when all things considered, you look at where St. John's needs to get better. We kind of found out in these two preseason games, and I think Rick Pitino found out about a team that is brand new to each other for the most part. A lot of these guys have not played with each other. The starting five of, Dylan Mitchell, Jocelyn Sannon, Isaiah Sellers, Bryce Hopkins, and Zuby Ejiofor, all five needing to build that chemistry that you will need to see coming up in this 2025-2026 season that St. John's and its fans hopes will be a memorable one. Now, when we talk about this game as a whole, one, it was just a thrilling matchup between these two teams. Had all kinds of offensive firepower. It had some great defensive moments at times. It's really tough to kind of judge on the St. John's end because Rick Pitino said, we had the 22 turnovers. We turned over Michigan 22 times. And when you look at all things considered, I think you would say, man, that St. John's did great. When you would just say to someone, yeah, 22 points off turnovers, turn them over 22 times, great. That's all well and good. But then when you consider the fact they gave up 96 points, you kind of say, well, maybe we could have done a little bit of a better job defensively, and especially, I personally felt like in the paint is where St. John's was really lacking in this game against Michigan. Now, we're going to first start off with, in two interviews, play two sound bites. We'll have Zuby Ejiofor here and Rick Pitino talking about whether or not St. John's as a team is ready to take on the top talent they will be facing in this out-of-conference schedule.
Time to tell. We're just, like I said, we're going to watch film and figure out those areas that we could improve on. And, it's early on. It's early in the season, but, like we've said previously, we have a tough schedule ahead of us. So we have no time to waste in figuring out. And 10 new guys or anything like that, it's going to be difficult, but we got to figure it out. There's no excuses. Winning is a standard that we're trying to build here at St. John's. So everybody came here to win. All the transfers that came here to win. So whatever it takes, that's what we're going to figure it out and just be better and learn from it.
So first, we are working on getting the actual clips that I'll be able to play for you here, so we won't react to them together by me playing them off to the side. But I think, when all things considered, when you look at St. John's and how they were 2 years ago, when you had a team of guys that hadn't played together before, if you remember, to begin that season, St. John's was really wonky, and funny enough, it was against Michigan that really showed a lot of the glaring holes that St. John's had with a team that didn't build enough chemistry in its offseason during the ramp-ups during the exhibition games that year. It was clear that this team needed more and more time to really get going. And I think also when you consider the players that St. John's had 2 years ago in the schools that they were at before, you didn't have a lot of that competition. It didn't feel like those guys were exactly ready enough to take on a top team, top programs in college basketball. I mean, teams like Michigan, a Boston College, teams that play Power 6 college hoops, and guys are coming from Ivy League schools. They're coming from mid-majors, young high school, young freshmen. It was tough to really see early on it all come together. Eventually, as we know, it did, and St. John's ended up being one of the hottest teams in the country and one of the teams that everyone felt like was a snub for March Madness. But this year has been different, and I think last year was different in terms of the kids that Rick Pitino has gotten from a lot of the schools that he's been able to pull kids from. Ian Jackson from North Carolina, Bryce Hopkins, obviously from Providence, Jocelyn Sannon from Arizona State. A lot of kids that are coming over that have that experience, that have been at the big stage. And even a guy like Isaiah Sellers, who I'll talk about in a second, coming over from a school like Stanford. And I think that's really good to see. Now here was Rick Pitino talking about exactly what Zuby spoke about, which is St. John's ready to face a lot of the top teams they'll be playing in their out-of-conference schedule.
And we'll be ready for Quinnipiac. I don't know if we're ready for Alabama or Kentucky or miss the Las Vegas trip, but we will be. We'll get it done. A lot of people are in the same boat we're in, with new players. And, if next year's team, there'll be 8 new players again. It's just difficult. But I set the schedule tough because I want to know right now, I know that our guards don't rebound. We got to do something about it. If we played another team and we won the game, we don't know what our weaknesses are. So I wanted to find out, and I found out tonight what our weaknesses are. And it's a great teaching tool. These guys are great guys. I've said it 100 times, but they're not together defensively. And they're not together because they don't know each other. But we got to find out in a hurry. Like Alabama is one of the fastest shooting teams in America. We got to change it. Tonight we changed ends. We left the basket naked like 3 times because we didn't see the ball. But we'll make our corrections. It'll be a fun team to coach.
So there you go. Rick Pitino himself speaking about whether or not St. John's is going to be ready to take on, as he mentioned, a team like Alabama, and that game is quickly approaching. I would anticipate this game that St. John's just played against Michigan to look a lot like that game against Alabama, in the way that St. John's is going to be able to match a lot of these top programs that are going to be coming in to Madison Square Garden. Now, by me saying that, it's a top 10 matchup. And we can no longer really view St. John's as a team that's like, hey, they have to be able to go step for step and stride for stride with a lot of, can they keep up with a lot of these teams? You have to start looking at it like, no, can the other teams keep up with St. John's? Because St. John's needs to go out there and be the enforcer. They need to set the tempo. They need to be the team that everyone's like, hey, we got to get them. We got to get St. John's. We got to play our best basketball against these guys, or else it's not going to be a good night for us. And that's going to have to be, kind of the mindset this team has heading in to that game against the Crimson Tide. But again, St. John's, they got to get more chemistry. They got to build off each other. As you heard Rick Pitino said, it's their first time playing with a lot of these guys, their first time playing with each other. So it's going to take time. But, I think when you also look at the tough out of conference schedule, it's good that St. John's is not playing a bunch of, cupcakes. They didn't fill the schedule with, okay, well, we're going to go out to Las Vegas, but we're going to play a bunch of teams around that tournament that are just mid-majors and low majors, and we're just going to stack W's heading in to the Big East Conference, and we'll hopefully stay ranked. But by doing so, you're not going to know enough about your team, and you're not going to know the corrections that you really need to make. And that's what St. John's has done in their exhibition, and that's what they've done, and that's what they will do in their out-of-conference slate. Now, what I really liked in the second half was when guys weren't having, so from the first half of the second half, when guys were having an off, when guys were in foul trouble, they had to make the substitutions, you saw others step up. Zuby had a tremendous second half. I shouldn't, say others, but other guys be able to step up. Sannon, 10 points, led St. John's in scoring in the first half. He was 3 of 6 from the field. He was 0 for 3 shooting from beyond. We'll get to that in a moment. You look at a guy like Bryce Hopkins who had 6 points. He was 1 of 5 from the field. Grabbed 5 boards. But in the second half, Zuby was the one who stepped up along with Dylan Mitchell. Mitchell had 11 points. Zuby had 20. Hopkins was able to also add in 6. But, Sannon ran into foul trouble. Isaiah Sellers, he really ran. I mean, he played just 8 minutes and fouled out. He got into foul trouble early in the first half. And in the second half, he couldn't defend without fouling. So that's something that Rick Pitino, for sure, and that coaching staff will for sure be harping on Sellers before we ramp up against Quinnipiac. Now, for St. John's, defending is their identity. Playing for the name on the front compared to the name on the back is their identity. And Rick Pitino was asked, is this team doing just that? Are they playing for the name on the front?
Oh, they're definitely playing for the name on the front. They're great guys. Great guys. This was a wonderful game, exhibition game. I mean, you like to win, but it doesn't count. It doesn't matter. You're almost better sometimes losing to understand now that your guards don't rebound. They have to rebound. We had 2 chances to win the game. We missed free throws, but it wasn't. I don't ever look at missed free throws because by and large we're a much better free throw shooting team this year. I saw a lot of really good things, but I think the weaknesses just rely on 8 new guys just not playing together. But a great game.
Well, I will say this: we know St. John's has had their free throw shooting issues in the past couple seasons, and we know what this St. John's team ultimately can do. It's just a matter of, can they play their best basketball at the right time, especially offensively. And sticking with that, you look at the 3-point shooting the other night, not great. 4 of 23 compared to Michigan, who shot 8 of 19. I'm hoping we don't have to fall under the same trap that we were in last year, and really even the year before that, where St. John's struggled shooting from the outside. Now, Leotopoulos was 2 of 4 from beyond. He did a great job. Sannon was 1 of 4. Dylan Darling added in a three-pointer as well. But, guys like Ian Jackson, Isaiah Sellers, guys that I think we like to see be able to knock down shots from the outside. And Ian Jackson did not have the best game, but hearing from Rick Pitino afterwards sounds like there was something going on injury-wise with Ian.
Well, he missed. He was out 3 days with a sprained ankle. I'm not concerned. He'll play better than he did tonight. We got to work on Ian's handle. When he gets a little bump, he doesn't cough it up. That's the biggest thing with him. But he'll play much better than he played tonight. I've got confidence in him.
So Ian Jackson had 2 turnovers in those 21 minutes. He offered in 2 steals. He had 2 assists, a board, and just 2 points. So he was 0 for 4 from beyond. He was just 1 of 8 from the field. So Ian Jackson certainly is a player that St. John's and the coaching staff will for sure recognize, saying, hey, we got to get this guy right before the season. And hopefully St. John's will be just that. They will be ready to go before the season. As we talked about the defensive problems, St. John's had 3 players fouled out, Zuby, Sellers, and Josan Sannon. The goal is obviously St. John's will come together both on the offensive and defensive side as we progress. But the identity of the St. John's team under Rick Pitino has always been defense first. And that's going to be something that we'll obviously be harping on as the season begins, as we tip off a week from today, November the 3rd, a week from yesterday, I should say, as we're recording this October 28th, a week from yesterday, so next Monday, against Quinnipiac, which will hopefully lead to a win, and definitely needs to lead to a win, but will hopefully begin what should be a memorable season for St. John's. All right, coming up, Later this week on the Johnny's Report, we'll welcome back Thomas Cavanaugh from Rumble in the Garden. Him and I will discuss a Big East preview coming up later this week on the Johnny's Report. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, I'll talk to you next time.